Good evening. This is Real News with Real Vida TV. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our first episode. I'm Jeremy Coe, and today is Thursday, September 4th, 2025, and these are just some of the stories that we're following. First of all, we'll go to the war in Ukraine. 26 Western allies have formally committed to deploying troops by land, sea, or air to Ukraine the day after a ceasefire deal was agreed. According to Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, French leaders made the announcement after a summit of 35 countries dubbed the Coalition of the Willing. Russia has once again rejected the idea of foreign troops being stationed in Ukraine, and this comes just as European leaders met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and held a joint call with President Donald Trump. Here is just a photo from the recent meeting in the White House between President Trump and some of the leaders of the European nations, as well as Volodymyr Zelensky, that occurred in August, just a few weeks ago. So on Thursday, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, said any plan to have foreign military personnel deployed to Ukraine would be unacceptable to Moscow, of course, according to Reuters. Russia is not going to discuss a foreign intervention in Ukraine in any form or any format that is fundamentally unacceptable and undermines any security, Zakharova told reporters, according to Reuters. NATO chief Mark Rutte said on Thursday that Russia had no veto on Western troops being deployed to Ukraine. So why are we interested, he said, in what Russia thinks about troops in Ukraine? It's a sovereign country. It's not for them to decide. The only problem with that is Russia is now possessing approximately 20%, a little over 20% of the former sovereign territory of Ukraine and has now claimed to annex it after elections. So obviously this is a point of controversy. So there is a recent picture of Vladimir Putin of Russia speaking about this crisis that continues to just accelerate. French hospitals have also been ordered, and this is a shocking development. French hospitals have been ordered to make preparations for an imminent war in Europe, as Germany says it is on alert for Russia's military drills. This program recently played a video from a alleged Russian Special Forces colonel talking about that Russia was going to have to take the war to Berlin in Germany. These are things that you're not hearing in the American media. But French hospitals haven't been ordered to prepare for war since 1940. France's Ministry of Health has told health bodies across the country to prepare for a possible major engagement by March 2026, according to documents obtained by a newspaper in France. The French government is predicting a scenario where the nation will become a supporting state that has the capacity to take a massive number of wounded soldiers from France and other European nations. So Vladimir Zelensky, the prime minister of Ukraine, his dream is to draw NATO directly into the conflict with Russia on Ukraine's behalf, according to former Polish president Duda. So it was a recent statement. Here's NATO troops training in Europe, and they're training for potential conflict with Russia, which is a global nuclear superpower. So here is a map showing the breakdown of the nations of NATO, of course, the United States, Canada, and most of the major European nations, including France, Germany, and England. And of course, there's Russia, which is the largest country in the world by land territory. So speaking in an interview with journalist Bogdan Romanovsky, Duda recalled an incident in November 2022 when a Ukrainian air defense missile struck near a Polish border village, killing one person. Zelensky immediately blamed Russia and urged Warsaw, that's the capital of Poland, to invoke NATO's collective defense clause. That's Article 5, which we've talked a lot about here on the program, that requires that essentially the allegation is that any attack on any NATO country requires all other NATO members to join in the defense of that member. So Duda, the former Polish prime minister, said the Ukrainian leader was pressuring him at the time to publicly declare that the weapon was Russian in origin, and he refused to do so because there was not credible proof in his mind at the time that it was Russian. But there was a rush to declare that in favor of accelerating the war process. Ukraine now has announced a powerful new weapon that could completely shift the balance of its conflict with Russia. It's the Flamingo cruise missile, allegedly developed by defense startup Firepoint. The missile is said to be capable of carrying a 2,500-pound approximately warhead and striking targets up to 3,000 kilometers away, which would signal a huge leap in Ukraine's military capabilities and their domestic arms production. Of course, there's significant question internationally in how a nation that's at war and has the economic problems that Ukraine has was able to develop such a technologically advanced weapon without help from, of course, the suspicion is the United States and military technology from the United States. This will be a significant the development of this Flamingo cruise missile, because it would allow the major population centers in Russia to now be within reach of a cruise missile fired not by the United States or other NATO members, but directly by Ukraine themselves, who are the ones who supposedly are the ones at war with Russia right now. So far, the concern has been the only way that Ukraine was going to be capable of striking at Russia directly in any kind of direct way would be for the United States or some other NATO power to provide cruise missiles. So that's why the development of this cruise missile is considered to be so significant. Of course, many people say that the second Ukraine starts firing cruise missiles at major population centers in Russia, including Moscow, St. Petersburg, and others, obviously that would require Moscow to accelerate or step up their attacks on Ukraine. And of course, it goes without saying that Russia, which is arguably the world's leading nuclear superpower, is certainly a peer of the United States in nuclear power, has had the capability of completely wiping out all of Ukraine's major population centers for the duration of this war, and has thus far refused to do so. So it is a concerning development because it may end up requiring Moscow, in their minds, certainly, to increase the level of force used and to begin to target more of the population centers instead of military targets. So here is a photo of the Flamingo cruise missile that's been released by the Ukrainian Defense Forces, as well as a schematic that's been provided showing essentially the technical specifications of this cruise missile. It's a heavy cruise missile. So Firepoint is the name of the manufacturer. Currently, they manufacture approximately 1 Flamingo missile per day, with plans to scale up to about 7 daily by October of this year, 2025. So that would be up to 2,500 of these cruise missiles annually. This war has been going on for several years now, going on 3. So that would be 7,500 in the course of 3 years if they're able to actually achieve this level of production and the war continues, which everyone who is watching it believes it's going to continue, because neither of the belligerents, Russia or Ukraine, are showing any signs of reaching a ceasefire or laying down their arms. So Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is expecting mass production by December of this year, 2025. And Ukraine has now proclaimed itself, or its goal, to become the Silicon Valley of defense. No doubt, with significant foreign investment from the United States, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. So, on a similar but unrelated note, this is President Putin, Prime Minister Xi of China, and Kim Jong-un of North Korea. In the news also this past week, there was a meeting between these 3 leaders. And these 3 leaders, of course, are all historically belligerents to the United States in the last 50 to 75 years. And they had a meeting shortly after, really just a few weeks after, Putin had a meeting with President Trump of the United States in Alaska, which there was some announcements and discussion of maybe they were close to reaching agreements for a ceasefire. But when Putin immediately goes and meets with Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un, it was seen as essentially a slap in the face to President Putin. They were discussing on a hot mic. It's a very interesting moment. Both Xi Jinping and Putin were discussing life-prolonging organ transplants and immortality as they chatted before a massive military parade in Beijing on Wednesday, in comments that were picked up by state media microphones. It's a suspicious story to me because in North Korea, China, and Russia, state media microphones never pick up audio that's not intended to be picked up. However, these images showed Xi shaking hands, speaking with Putin and Kim Jong-un as they walked down a red carpet by Tiananmen Square. And these were viewed essentially that even the location of the meeting was viewed as a challenge of President Trump and the U.S.-led global order that has prevailed for more than a century. And I'll talk more about Tiananmen Square in just a moment. And so in regards to this discussion of immortality, allegedly Xi said on the hot mic, without suspecting that he was being picked up, in Chinese, of course, these days 70 years old, he mused in Mandarin as he walked beside Putin and Kim, and Xi's translator conveyed these remarks to Putin, who is then heard in Russian quoting a line from a Tang Dynasty poem. In the past, it used to be rare for someone to be older than 70, and these days they say that at 70, one is still a child. I have trouble believing that this were spontaneous, off-the-cuff remarks because I don't know why President Putin would be quoting a Tang Dynasty poem. I doubt if he learned that in school in Russia. However, I do want to talk for just a moment about Tiananmen Square. I'm putting a picture up now. This is a very famous picture, one of the most famous pictures of the last 50 years of history. This is called Tank Man. And in Tiananmen Square in 1989, as the winds of freedom and democracy were blowing across the entire world, from Germany at the Berlin Wall, in the Soviet Union, which was about to crumble and give way to alleged democracy in Russia, there were democratic uprisings in communist China, and specifically at Tiananmen Square. And this is a famous photo of one of the protesters who refused to move in front of these tanks. This picture was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. And so it's interesting that Putin and Xi chose that location to have their meeting because actually that location is known internationally. When someone hears the term Tiananmen Square, you automatically think the repression of democratic protest. And so for them to meet there is essentially a statement that we're going to squelch the democratic world order, is the way that it was interpreted by many in the media. So back to the hot mic. With the development of this biotechnology that we've had in recent years, human organs can be continuously transplanted. And according to the translators, Putin was talking about this and said that people could get younger as they grow older and may even become immortal, Putin said, according to the translator. And then Xi then spoke again in Mandarin as the camera cut away. Predictions are in this century, it may be possible to live to 150 years old. And Putin actually was asked about the exchange during a news conference and confirmed that this was, in fact, their conversation. Again, I have considerable question about whether or not this was a spontaneous or off-the-cuff discussion, since he was quoting a Tang Dynasty poem. However, it makes you wonder if this was not a spontaneous discussion, what the reason for this discussion on a so-called hot mic would be. He said, I think that was when we were going to the parade and the chairman spoke about this. He told reporters, referring to Chairman Xi, modern means, he said, both health improvement and medical means, and then even all kinds of surgical ones related to organ replacement, allow humanity to hope that active life will continue, not as it does today, Putin added. And so some of the international media pronounced this the axis of evil between Xi, Putin, and Kim Jong-un. That's the son from Britain. Xi and Putin, along with Kim and Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, have been dubbed the axis of upheaval also by some Western analysts. And Xi's decision to bring together the leaders of some of these most heavily sanctioned nations in the world was clearly calculated and clearly intended as a poke in the eye of the global world order, the West, and specifically President Donald Trump of the United States. This was the first time Kim Jong-un had been allowed to appear with Xi and Putin, who have at time in the past have tried to marginalize Kim Jong-un because of his history of savage repression of his own population, genocide on his own people. But what they have done by allowing him this invitation, which he accepted gladly, was a multilateral diplomatic event, which essentially elevates him to some kind of equality with the presidents of China and Russia. And the only thing that those three nations really have in common is that China and North Korea are communist. Russia is a democratic, crony capitalist nation that used to be communist, and its leader was an avid communist and a card-carrying communist. But they all have nuclear weapons, and they all are essentially at odds with the democratic order, the West, and the United States specifically. So Xi and Putin have been making it their ambition to shake up the global status quo for several years, and the foreign minister of Russia, who's been around a long time, he's well known, he's a very cagey, smart guy, said, "We, together with you and with our sympathizers, will move towards a multipolar, just, democratic world order." He said in 2022 ahead of a meeting with his Chinese counterpart. Multipolar means right now the United States and the West, France, Germany, England, the other large economies of the West have a unipolar world order. But what they want to create is a multipolar world order. And here he is at Sergei Lavrov. China and Russia have declared a no-limits partnership, and neither Xi nor Putin, who are both 72, have expressed any intention of stepping down from their roles, which is probably why they're talking about immortality, about organ transplants, about trying to extend their lives, because neither of them have shown any signs of relinquishing power. Even though Xi's predecessors, Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, relinquished power after 10 years in office, he abolished term limits in 2018, and in 2023 was handed to his third term as the Chinese president. And Putin was just elected to his record fifth six-year term last year in Russia. Many people, international observers, criticized the vote as democratically a farce, and all of Putin's serious political opponents were barred from running, and many of them were jailed. Putin has twice used his leverage as Russia's leader to amend the Constitution so he can stay in power until he's in his mid-80s, which is well over 10 years from now. And he's already the longest-serving Kremlin leader since the dictator of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin. China, meanwhile, has historically had one of the lowest rates of organ donation in the world, with a severe shortage of organ donors and a long-standing black market organ trade. And recently, in 2016, fairly recently in world history, about 4 years into Xi's tenure, surgeons from the World Health Organization gathered in Beijing to try and allay skepticism about whether Chinese hospitals had stopped performing transplants with the organs of executed prisoners. So now, turning to the economy here in the United States. A shocking new CBS News survey was just released, disclosing that the percentage of Americans who believe that economic conditions are getting worse is more than twice as high as the percentage of Americans that believe economic conditions are getting better. According to this survey, Americans are rating the economy unfavorably, with a majority of respondents choosing the words uncertain, struggling to describe it. Other words like unfair, punishing, rebounding, expanding, and fair all trailed behind that. Most U.S. adults believe the economy is getting worse. And 56% of all the respondents said the economy is trending down. 27% said it's trending up. 17% argue it's remaining steady. When you've got well over half of all people believing that the economy is bad, it has its own kind of effect, because those people are less likely to buy a car, less likely to buy a house, less likely to spend money on convenience things or disposable kind of income. They're more likely to save and less likely to invest in the economy. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the U.S. economy must now produce about 150,000 jobs every month just to keep up with population growth, as well as immigration. So the fact that it's being reported that the economy is adding less than that number of jobs once again last month in August is a very, very troubling sign. So unemployment is really starting to grow. And of course, as usual, the federal government, any administration, Democrat or Republican, Biden, Obama, Bush, Trump, whoever it is, they always hide the numbers or conceal the numbers or inflate the numbers or artificially manipulate the numbers because it's all about getting reelected. So the U.S. private sector hiring rose less than expected in August. Private payrolls increased by just 54,000 in August, and that's below the forecast of 75,000 from economists, and it's a market revision down. So obviously this is concern because when people are getting laid off, of course, it's going to have a ripple effect in the economy. Initial claims for unemployment benefits increased to 237,000 people, 250,000 people essentially last week applied for unemployment benefits. At the same time, number of job openings has fallen to the lowest level in nearly 5 years. I'm going to show you this story now related to one of the world's largest companies, ConocoPhillips. It's one of the largest independent exploration and production companies in the U.S., told employees earlier it plans to reduce its overall workforce by 25%. That is a shockingly large reduction. This comes as the U.S. economic data shows the signs of softening that we've discussed, the disappointing jobs figures. And so right now, West Texas Intermediate crude prices are trading lower amid increased concerns about OPEC supply. OPEC is the organization of petroleum exporting countries, and there are some concerns about supply now. So obviously, this is a oil and gas platform out in the Gulf, run by ConocoPhillips. U.S. manufacturing contracted for a 6th straight month in August as factories dealt with the fallout from the Trump administration's import tariffs. Some manufacturers described the current business environment as much worse than the Great Recession in 2008, which is pretty shocking because the Great Recession was a significant contraction of the economy that had effects for a decade. So the tariffs have been very controversial. Of course, they've been in the courts. There's a federal appellate court decision recently finding them unconstitutional. That's going to be appealed to the United States Supreme Court. But all of that uncertainty is making it hard for businesses to predict what comes next and what they should do. And so what it does is it causes people to sit on their money, to not hire or spend money because they don't know what the future holds. So the Institute for Supply Management survey on Tuesday also showed some manufacturers complaining that the sweeping import duties related to the tariffs were making it difficult to manufacture goods in the United States. When it's difficult for manufacturers in the U.S. to manufacture, then it means they're less likely to bring on new employees, more likely to lay off current employees, which of course has ripples on the economy. So turning now to the situation in the Middle East. There is a very significant story developing. We're now in the month of September, and this month, on September 22nd, France in Europe and Saudi Arabia are going to co-chair the conference on the two-state solution at the United Nations on September 22nd. The goal of this conference is to create an unstoppable wave of momentum towards the creation of a Palestinian state. Israel, of course, is very upset about this conference. And in the meantime, they're considering annexing large portions of the West Bank in response. And if that happens, Israel's Islamic neighbors will go absolutely berserk, and a catastrophic war could break out in the Middle East. So this is a point that is going to only increase the tension in the Middle East in what's already been an extremely tense year with the war between Israel and Iran. When the French president Emmanuel Macron announced that he would personally co-chair the conference, he acknowledged that annexation by Israel could be a response to this proposal. And of course, when they mention the words or the phrase two-state solution, what that means is that what is currently Israel would have become two different nations, Israel and a Palestinian state. It's been discussed, argued about in the United Nations essentially since the creation of Israel back in the late 1940s. But now things have developed to the point where the international support for this two-state solution is such that it is going to be very difficult for Israel and the United States, who has for many years been the lone veto in the United Nations Security Council against measures regarding Israel, to stop this wave. And many people have opined that President Trump, in his dealings with the Gulf Arab states over the last few months, as they prepared the support for the attack on Iran and the Iranian nuclear program, that it is possible that Trump has already made a deal with some of these Gulf Arab states to support a two-state solution in Israel. Not to mention, there have been several news articles in the last few months. It's not known whether these are legitimate or whether some of them were, in fact, bluffs, that the United States and Israel there's been some daylight between the two because disagreement between Netanyahu and Trump on some of these issues, including annexation of some of the West Bank. So we'll talk more about that. All right, so this conference is going to coincide with the UN General Assembly, and it marks a renewed push for diplomatic engagement despite the ongoing war in Gaza. So Macron tweeted, "I just spoke with the Saudi Crown Prince. Together we will lead the two-state solution conference in New York on September 22nd. He emphasized that no annexation or forced displacement will stop the momentum we have built together with the Crown Prince, momentum that many of our partners have joined." And of course, this is what I was referring to. The Saudi Crown Prince is going to co-chair this conference with Emmanuel Macron, and the Saudi Crown Prince was one of the leaders who was meeting with Trump when Trump traveled to the Gulf Arab states and to Saudi Arabia just prior to the attack in Iran back in May. All right. Here is a recent picture of Macron with Trump in the Oval Office. So now, in response to this, it's being reported all over the world that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will convene a meeting of top officials to discuss what to do. Their proposal is to annex at least some portion of the West Bank, and that's one of the options that's under consideration. We're going to show you a picture here of the map of the West Bank. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is weighing this plan to annex at least parts of the West Bank ahead of this month's UN Assembly. And he's expected to convene with his ministers to discuss this possibility. He wants to apply, in his words, sovereignty to certain areas of the West Bank. But he has yet to make a final decision despite pushes from members of his far-right coalition. This is obviously a tinderbox that could become the war in Israel that's been expected for many, many years now. Actually, it's been reported by Axios that Israel may annex approximately 60% of the West Bank. To explain a little further, Israel has the Gaza Strip to the southwest. It has to the east on the Jordan River, the West Bank. It's the West Bank of the Jordan is what that is referring to. The Jordan River goes north to south from the Sea of Galilee or the Sea of Tiberias or whatever it's called, by who's calling it, down to the Dead Sea in the south. On the east of that is the nation of Jordan. And on the west of that is the West Bank, which has many Palestinians. It also has many Israeli Jewish settlements. So what the nation of Israel is discussing doing when they say annexing the West Bank, right now it's not considered a part of Israel. And so they're discussing taking those Israeli settlements in certain parts of the West Bank, especially the strategic portions, and annexing it into the nation of Israel so it's no longer part of the West Bank. And the assumption is Israel's going to say to the United Nations, well, you can try and force a two-state solution on us all you want, but these parts of the West Bank now belong to Israel. It's our sovereign territory. It's interesting because in many ways, there are similarities between the war in Ukraine and the annexation by certain parts of the eastern side of Ukraine by Russia. Although it has been traditionally Israeli territory, it's belonged to the Jewish people. It was promised to the Jews by God back beginning with Abraham through Moses. But I think the dynamics of the annexation and the similarities to Russia and the way the international community is responding to it is some interesting similarities and some differences. So one European official even said that Israel would annex all of what they're calling Area C in the West Bank. And you'll see here from a recent meeting, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu looking at a map of the West Bank and pointing to areas that might be annexed. So it is becoming a fever pitch, and tensions are getting high on the streets in the West Bank, where Israeli soldiers still operate. On a more personal note, back in 2011, Eve and I had an opportunity to travel to Israel. We actually did go inside the West Bank because the city of Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, the city where King David was from, is actually located in Judea, which is the West Bank, mostly located in the West Bank. And I will just say on a personal note, when our tour bus went through the gates and drove inside the West Bank, there was a noticeable change in the environment. There was a high degree of tension that we felt while we were in Bethlehem. And it is a place that was almost 15 years ago. And that tension has remained until today. And the concern is that the annexation talk, the talk of the two-state solution, all of these things are going to potentially lead to a bloody conflict in Israel. Other options, the annexation of Israeli settlements and access routes, that's 10% of the West Bank. There's another one is to annex the settlements, the access routes, and the Jordan Valley, which is 30% of the West Bank. So you're hearing all these options discussed. How much will Israel be able to annex and get away with in regards to the international community? I don't know. I'm quite sure that behind the scenes, there's significant negotiations taking place right now. Benjamin Netanyahu's problem is he is the leader of a coalition government that was formed with the most religious, most conservative, farthest right considered parties in Israel. And those parties do not want Netanyahu to give up any land in any kind of in the West Bank at all. And so Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich is proposing a plan in which Israel annexes 82% of the West Bank. And so obviously, United Arab Emirates, which is one of the Gulf state partners that Trump was discussing the attack with Iran with, I'm quite sure that hasn't been disclosed, but it's assumed. The United Arab Emirates warned that any move to annex 82% of the West Bank would spell the end of Israel's integration into the Middle East. The last few years has seen Israel making friends with nations that formerly would have been enemies, such as United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and the other Gulf states. This move to annex 82% of the West Bank would be considered the end of that, allegedly, by those Gulf states. All right, so this plan of annexation that's continuing right now is the biggest sign so far of the momentum in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing government to apply Israeli sovereignty to the West Bank in response to this push for a two-state solution. And they're saying that the moment has come. Really, Israel and the leaders of the government there see this as a fight for the survival of the nation of Israel, because once a two-state solution in their mind has been pushed on the nation of Israel, and there is a Palestinian nation, not just a territory, but a nation right on their doorstep, and in between them and the security of the Jordan River as a defense from nations to the east, like Iran, that are enemies of theirs. It's considered to be life or death for the nation of Israel by many in Israel. So you can see why this is becoming a very hotly contested issue. So that concludes our news stories for this first episode of Real Vida TV's Real News. Thank you for watching. And until next time, remember, in the words of our Savior, Jesus Christ, look up.